We've been thinking a lot about distinction between aversion and other primary motivational states on the one hand, and desires on the other. It's time now to tie that back to our earlier discussion about intention and to the question, what's the mark that distinguishes your actions from things that merely happen to you? How is anything we've been looking at today relevant to that question about action that we started with all those weeks ago? Well, the first thing I want to do is give you a sort of summary which does provide such a connection. We know that in rats and humans we can dissociate at least two kinds of states involved in causing actions. These are preferences or desires, I'm using those two terms interchangeably, on the one hand, and primary motivational states such as aversion on the other. Those two kinds of state are linked to distinct processes and to distinct patterns of explanation. We didn't spend time going into the details here, so let me just say very loosely that the aversion is linked to a narrowly associative pattern of explanation, whereas desires are linked to a rationalizing or reason-giving pattern of explanation. So if we look carefully at the sorts of explanations that animal learning theorists offer of behaviour, we can make that distinction fairly clear. And moreover, this distinction between desires on the one hand, primary motivational states on the others, corresponds to the two patterns of explanation, reason-giving explanation and a narrowly associative form of explanation. That's wonderful. There's an important point though, which is that both patterns of explanation involve justifying reasons of one kind or another. After all, when the rat is averse to the sucrose solution, or you're averse to the poison, it's not actually that the papaya, sorry, you're averse to the papaya, not the poison. When you're averse to the papaya or the rat's averse to the sucrose solution, this isn't actually toxic at all. The system has gone wrong here, has been tricked into making you and the rat averse to things which are in fact not harmful at all. So if we're to understand this, we need to appeal to justifying reasons rather than explanatory reasons. Why is it that you don't eat that delicious papaya? Not because it's not good for you. It would probably do wonders for your hangover. Here's a thought. Intentions, along with beliefs and desires, play a role in one of these patterns of explanation, but not in the other. They play a role in the reason-giving pattern of explanation, the rationalizing explanation. They don't play a role in the narrowly associative form of explanation. So maybe you can kind of see where I'm going with this. What I really want to suggest in a moment is that it was a mistake to ask the question, what is the mark that distinguishes actions from things that merely happen to you, with the idea that there was just there a single binary distinction to be had. There are different kinds of explanation, distinct kinds of motivational state that can pull you in different ways. So correspondingly, we should recognise that there can be different marks which distinguish actions from things that merely happen to you, depending on what kind of action and what pattern of explanation we're interested in. Our view up until this point was too narrow. The discoveries from animal learning theorists about motivational systems being distinct provides us with a much richer understanding of the nature of action. But let me go slowly here. I'm jumping ahead. What I really want to do is to go slowly, and the first thing I'm going to do is offer you an argument against the view that all actions can be distinguished by appeal to intentions. The argument's very simple. Here it goes. When the rat doesn't enter the magazine, it is acting. It is acting. It's not entering the magazine. So you remember how this goes. After being poisoned, the rat's there pressing the lever, just like the rat that was poisoned in relation to a different food entirely, not the sucrose solution, but something else. But when it goes to the magazine, it doesn't enter that magazine. It sort of doesn't really want to get in there and have that sucrose solution. It's actually behaving just like the rat that's already experienced the sucrose solution in the past. So the rat here, in not entering the magazine, is performing an action. That rat's action is driven by the aversion and the stimulus which is associated with the magazine. Good. It follows from this that the rat's action does not involve intention. How do I know? Because we've got a full, complete explanation of the action with no room for intention. There's a pattern of explanation here that just doesn't involve intention at all, and there's no need for intention either. Follows from this then that not all actions involve intentions. So here I have, if you will, an alternative to Frankfurt's argument from spiders or Bach's argument from ducking. The difference, of course, is that in those arguments, both depended on the premise that what happens in one case of action, the distinction between the rat not entering the magazine and being physically restrained from doing so, is the same thing. It's one and the same distinction between that case and the case where, for example, the rat is pressing the lever versus you take the rat's little paw and bop it on the lever and make it press the lever. Right? So Frankfurt and Bach rely in their arguments on the idea that there's just one distinction to be made. But look at this argument. We're not making any assumption at all about there being a uniform distinction between actions and things that merely happen. All we're saying is that the category of action should be understood in a way that's broad enough to account to be applied to actions which are driven by primary motivational states and are stimulus driven. And indeed many of your actions and my actions are so explained. So it would be kind of odd to exclude them from the scope of action altogether. Marvellous. So we're not relying on the idea that there's a single distinction here. That's important. Let's go back. Our overall question, what's the mark that distinguishes actions, was answered by Davidson, who said it's intention. And that indeed has become the standard view among philosophers. We saw that those philosophers like Frankfurt and Bach, who've attempted to object to this view, have given us arguments where we cannot know that the premises are true. I don't mean just that you can't know and I can't know that the premises are true. I mean that we as a community of researchers are not in a position to know that the premises of their arguments are all true. So those arguments, objections, are less useful to us than we would like. But there is, I've suggested, an alternative, which is my objection from primary motivational states. I put it to you that there, you and I know that the premises of that argument are true, and so it's a useful argument here. But where does that leave us? Does that mean that Frankfurt has won and Davidson's view is just wrong? Has Frankfurt won after all? I don't think so. I don't think it's quite that simple. I think that what reflection on the distinction between different kinds of motivational states and the way that they can pull against each other in the life of a single animal, a human or a rat, that indicates that it was wrong of us to formulate the question in a way that expects a kind of binary answer, a single mark, a single contrast between actions and things which are not action. Instead, we should recognise that there are different kinds of motivational state, different patterns of explanation, correspondingly different kinds of action, and therefore multiple marks to be had. So it's not exactly that we would say Davidson's view is wrong. We would say that Davidson's view is limited to one kind of action, doesn't work for another. What about Frankfurt on guidance? Well, here I think matters are pretty complicated. So if we think about those stimulus-driven actions which are explained by the rat's aversion or the human's aversion, then of course there's going to be a limited role here for guidance. So the idea that action is behaviour whose course is under the guidance of an agent, that's going to look pretty thin if we recognise that the rat not entering the magazine, you not eating the papaya, is an action. On the other hand, Frankfurt has taught us something super important, and this is that if we want Davidson's view to work at all, we'd better think of intention not merely as somehow causing action, leaving open how that cause is, but rather we'd better think that intention plays a role along with other mental states in providing for the guidance of an action as it unfolds. This is Frankfurt's big insight, and we can hold on to that big insight without actually rejecting the claim that Davidson is right about the kinds of action that chiefly interest Frankfurt as well. So the conclusion that we have reached here is a kind of nuanced one. It rejects the idea that we have to choose between Frankfurt and Davidson. It takes elements of both of their views, but it also says that there was something wrong in the way that we set up the question in the first place. The key to making progress here, I suggest, even if you reject the details of what I'm telling you, is to think carefully about patterns of explanation for action. And the key source for that is the research on animal learning, where we have some carefully worked out patterns of explanation for human behaviour, as well as ways of operationally distinguishing between conjectures about where states are different or the same. That's something that gives us an enormous amount of theoretical power.